So what I wanted to do today was really just talk with you about risk-based monitoring as Covance has seen it evolve over the last few years since the release of the agency guidance, and really drill into some of the success factors that we've seen as we've developed the organizational capability. And really talk about some of the things we've found along the way have been important, and some of the things that have maybe prevented penetration into the industry that we maybe would have expected. So the guidance has been around for a long time, and the agency expectation is very clear. And this was most clear to me in some of the work I've been doing on the risk-based monitoring approach within Covance, when I did a presentation, a webinar with FDA a few months ago. And Jonathan Helfgott, who I was doing that webinar with, was asked the question at the end of the session, would implementation of risk-based monitoring cause damage and introduce inaccuracies into clinical trials? And his response was very interesting. He responded almost completely the other way and said, in my view, not implementing risk-based monitoring is going to cause damage and introduce inaccuracies into your clinical trials. And that was the clearest sentiment yet for me, that the FDA and the regulatory guidance and expectation is now very clear. So we're now a number of years out from that guidance, and we've not seen the penetration that we maybe expected. If you look at the data, maybe 10 to 15% of trials have risk-based monitoring in phase 2-3, and perhaps we could have expected that to be higher. So we commissioned some research. We went out to leaders in the industry, people in clinical development organizations, and we asked them the question, what do you expect to get from risk-based monitoring, the benefits you expect to achieve, but also what are the barriers and the things that are preventing you from implementing risk-based monitoring? And the answers were very interesting, and I suppose a little bit unexpected. So nearly half of the people we asked the question to felt that one of the biggest risks and biggest barriers they saw was not achieving the quality. So they thought that risk-based monitoring was potentially going to harm the quality of the trials they were delivering. But then they also felt that the changing environment, the change management challenge associated with such a big dynamic shift in the industry was also going to cause a problem for their partners, so internally for their own departments, but also in the CROs that they were working with. And then possibly the most interesting is that there was a significant number of people, a third of people, felt that risk-based monitoring was going to give rise to greater cost of the trials that were being conducted. So we were a little surprised about this. This got us to thinking, what is the driver of that? And we felt that possibly this was driven by maybe elements of misunderstanding and a thought that reduced SDV, which is sometimes used very synonymously with RBM as a whole, was driving this concern that there would be a lot of remediation quality fixes that would be needed late in the trials, and that would have a lot of cost in driving that. So in this thought process, we really started to think about what is the biggest barrier to risk-based monitoring. And risk-based monitoring is very complicated. There's lots of enablers, there's lots of components, there's lots of solutions. And really we think that one of the challenges is seeing the forest for the trees. So the different components of risk-based monitoring mean different things to different people, and potentially even there's a fundamental misunderstanding in some parts about what risk-based monitoring truly is. So people lose focus, they can't see the forest for the trees, and because of this, we think it's important that we focus on the end goal of what risk-based monitoring is trying to achieve, and that is a robust set of data which is delivered with efficiency and without errors that matter. So thinking about the end of the process and then using that to guide all of the things we do in the development of our RBM process. So in doing this, we've been able to look at what are the enablers that we need in our RBM implementation. So enablers like technology, tools, systems, but also looking at things that need to be outputs of this. We need to have efficiency in what we deliver. And then the objective, which is a data set which withstands regulatory scrutiny. And we wrapped all of this up into the overall solution, which is a robust RBM process. So this is one of the key things we found, is really focusing on that end goal has allowed us to help our organization understand what risk-based monitoring is. And it's also supported a lot of the conversations we've had with clients. So it's more than only monitoring. It's an entire solution that looks at the risk of failure. Where is that risk of failure? And how do you design your process to address that? There's been a lot of conversations in risk-based monitoring as well about what is the value of the process. So this is often focused on reduced SDV. It's focused on extending the frequency of intervals of on-site monitoring, and that driving the cost advantages that people want to see. But actually, we really wanted to take a step back from that and focus on quality by design and some of the efficiencies and benefits that go alongside improving the quality of the trials that we're performing. So we can see a hierarchy here that goes all the way from protocol simplification. So although this isn't directly part of risk-based monitoring, the best way of avoiding a cost is to never collect the variable that leads to that cost. So if you never collect it, it never generates a risk, it never generates a cost. And this is something industry has struggled with for many years, and we think this is an opportunity to increase the traction in that area. But sometimes you have to collect a certain variable to meet your regulatory aims, of course. So here, quality by design becomes more and more important. So the next step is making sure what you are collecting in the protocol is fitting with standard of care, it's clear, you're collecting it in the optimal way. So this, again, it reduces the amount of errors, amount of critical risks, and therefore reduces the cost of remediation. But then sometimes you need complex items within your protocol, again, to meet your aims. And here's where systematic mitigation also plays a part. So picking those things up in your risk assessment, knowing that a certain component of your protocol is risky, it's prone to failure, and mitigating that from the beginning of the study, that prevents the process failures, prevents the issues occurring, and therefore decreases the remediation burden. Moving down this hierarchy, we have centralized data surveillance, because at the beginning of the trial, we don't know everything that's going to go wrong. We have unknown unknowns, so implementing central data surveillance, actively using physicians, statisticians to go through the emerging data sets, and to make sure that we pick up issues early, allows us to correct those at maybe only 10% of patients instead of at 90% of patients, and again, reduces remediation, reduces burden downstream. And then only at the bottom of this page do you really see some of the traditional cost benefits people have aimed to find from risk-based monitoring, and this is reduced on-site and risk-targeted on-site review. So as you can see, there's a hierarchy of efficiency and quality gains which go hand in hand and drive value through risk-based monitoring. So on this visual, I want to build on that concept I talked earlier about starting with the end in mind. So the end of this study is this robust data set that you can hand to the EMA or to the FDA, and you will know that they can look at the processes you've had in place, and they can see you properly identified the risks, you identified the critical data appropriately, your monitoring approaches and your study was delivered in a way which was appropriate for those, and you closed out the issues that you found and had delivered the study in a state of control. Traditionally, we'd often focused as an industry on just the third box, and a lot of the discussions around RBM have focused on that third box as well, and we think that's a mistake. So if you keep that concept of starting with the end in mind and take that all the way through, right to the beginning of the study, so the risk assessment, the protocol design, going all the way through your CRF build, through your monitoring strategies, but then as the data flows through the data cleaning, the analysis, and the reporting phase, all of those steps should remain focused on that end goal and should be appropriate to how the agency is going to review that outcome. And if we do this, then it allows us to see that risk-based monitoring is more than just looking at the monitoring component of the trial. I think this is also important because if this doesn't happen, then the risk is that you, through your processes, are very effective in identifying areas of risk, but then you don't, through the process, have a robust way of closing those risks out. and you end up with something which is maybe counterintuitively more risky because you're effective at flagging, but then not effective at closing. I think the other danger here, without looking at this holistically, is you take decisions in monitoring, you take decisions at the front end of the process, but then your data cleaning, your medical review, your statistics review doesn't account for the same levels of review that you used in monitoring, and you can end up in a situation of back-end cleaning causing delays downstream just before database lock. So moving on, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the process we've implemented. So starting with this slide, the first chevron really flags that the protocol is the blueprint for quality. So I said this on previous slides that we should start with the end in mind. And obviously the starting point here, and a very strong message from the regulators, is that the protocol is the important document. So we should always maintain an ability to go back to adapt the protocol for the areas of risk we're seeing evolving through the course of the study. But then after that protocol design is set, the absolute key component of an effective risk-based monitoring process is understanding where the risk is. So the risk is in many different places. It's in the data, it's in the sites you choose, it's in the protocol design that you choose. And this means you need a very robust, broad, cross-functional risk assessment that doesn't just look at the medical components, but also looks at data flow, the data collection instruments, how prone are data failure, and how prone to operational failure is this project out at the site. So this risk assessment then guides the monitoring decisions you take. So how do you select your sites, knowing what is risky about this particular site mix? How do you design analytics programs to look at the areas of riskiness in your protocol, things that will cause a real challenge for agencies at the end? But also then, how do you link that through into the adaptation you expect to see through the course of the trial? How do you expect to survey the evolving risk through the program? And after that's all been done, after those decisions have been made, this goes into the risk-based monitoring plan. So this document in the past maybe was relatively small, but now this document includes the analysis of risk, the joining up of that risk to a monitoring solution, and then flowing through all the way to how you're going to close out and adapt that process over time. So this document becomes more and more critical. It really tells the story of the entire project. There's a lot of focus in these kind of conferences and in the literature about this step, which is performance analytics. So Covance has invested heavily, like many others, in performance analytics. So the integration of data from CTMS, IVRS, from the EDC system to really track the emerging pattern of data and quality across the study, and then use that to make operational decisions about how the study will run. But I think the important point here is that this is only as good as the risk assessment you did in the beginning. So we have to program these analytics bearing in mind the particular risk profile of the study. So it's more than just a black box of standard analytics. It has to be adapted to the particular needs of this protocol. And then these final chevrons look at the interface with the sites, interface with the monitoring teams. And I think this is illustrative that of this entire continuum, only these last two chevrons really are monitoring at sites. All of the rest of them are in planning, effective risk assessments, and are far more front-loaded, as we see with good project management philosophy. Spend more time in planning, you'll succeed more in execution. So here we see that the interventions, the remote monitoring, the on-site monitoring, but also the central data surveillance that we perform throughout the course of the study to make sure we're operating in a state of control. And then, as I said on the previous slide, in slide 6, in chevron 6, having a robust issue resolution process is absolutely paramount in this setting. So if you don't have that, then you have a robust set of analytics that tell you where the red flags are, and at the end of the study you will have a load of red flags which don't have a resolution to them, and clearly that's going to increase your regulatory risk. So having this issue resolution, having that closed loop, is one of the cornerstones of an effective process. And then fundamentally we want risk-based monitoring to adapt. So this has been a concept that has certainly been called out very clearly by the agencies. that as you see a change in the level of risk, as a site becomes more risky, a site becomes less risky, you should titrate the level of intervention up and down to account for that. But you should even go back further. So if you see a new risk emerging through your review, you should go back potentially as far as the protocol design, amend the protocol to take that risk away, or at least update your analytics to track and survey that risk as it then happens for the rest of the study. So this is a continual cycle, a continual process improvement through the course of the study that helps us ensure that it's clear the project's been run in control. So that last slide was very complicated, and it's true that risk-based monitoring is very complicated. So we have significant changes in the way we manage our teams, the responsibilities between data management and clinical operations, data integrations. This changes the paradigm at the site, and all of this creates confusion or has the potential to create confusion. So one of the things we really tried to do in Covance as we implemented was take that complexity away from the end user. So the complexity has to be there, but it doesn't have to be there in the line of sight of an operator, a monitor, a data manager who's using this process day to day. So many things that we've done to address that. So starting from the top, it's absolutely critical to have a clear risk-based monitoring strategy. So this can purvey across the whole organization. Why are we doing risk-based monitoring? What is risk-based monitoring? What is the strategy we're taking? And through effective change management, making sure that the organization is fully switched on to what we're doing so they understand it intuitively. But then we have to adapt our organization to this different environment. So it's probably simpler and maybe the easy way out to drop risk-based monitoring onto existing organizational structures to then say this will work. But we thought that was a recipe for disaster, so we made some changes to our organization. We implemented some specific roles, risk-based monitoring leads, triage teams, to make this process work more effectively. So we've built that critical mass of experts in the business who can really then help drive this communication out to the rest of the organization. The analytics we mentioned before are also key here. So again, the complexity of algorithms, of data integrations, we have people within our IT and informatics department that really need to know that stuff. But a monitor, a risk-based monitoring lead, a data manager, they don't need to be bothered with this day to day. They need workflows that help them use the tools, but the tools should be intuitive, should transform the data we're accruing into information that they can consume and make operational decisions on the back of. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about here was an RBM toolkit. So again, RBM is very specific. So investing in workflows, investing in risk management plans that are tailored to risk-based monitoring, workflows for how the risk assessments will work and templates for RBM plans has really helped us in the implementation take that complexity away from the end users. So we've ended up with what we think is an elegant solution that takes the complexity away from people and allows them to carry on their business and really understand risk-based monitoring. So there's a lot of focus on technology, as I said before, and it may sound as though in my discussion about process, in my discussion about change management, and about risk assessment, that I'm saying that technology isn't important. But that's certainly not the case. We think that technology is the most important enabler of risk-based monitoring, but it's just that. It's an enabler of a larger process, and without that larger process before and after technology, it's next to useless. So first of all, the risk assessment that we perform that guides the programming of the technology platform is absolutely critical. This makes the technology solution fit for purpose, makes this fit with what we need for that particular project, and allows us to take operational decisions that are appropriate and are not just generating significant red flags without any real purpose. And then second, there has to be this robust downstream process. I talked about ease and simplicity at the user interface. So the technology output needs to then integrate into a workflow, into an effective decision-making process, allowing us to trigger our monitoring interventions, allowing us to titrate effort up and down on a site-by-site basis. And so you can see that technology fits right into our overall strategy, but it has to be a tool in the armory of risk-based monitoring rather than it being the entirety of the risk-based monitoring solution. So this is why we've looked at the entire solution from quality by design, risk assessment, technology, issue management, organization. All of those have been key components in the development. Okay, so I've talked about a few key elements as I've gone through the presentation today. So I've talked about starting with the end in mind, and that's the use case of the data, the regulatory robustness and integrity of the data set. I've talked about quality by design, why value and efficiency in risk-based monitoring is more than just the monitoring strategy you choose. It flows all the way from the beginning of the process. I've talked about complexity of risk-based monitoring, how we need to take that complexity away from the end user and make this simple at the point of use. And I've talked about technology as the key enabler of risk-based monitoring as part of a broader holistic solution. So fundamentally, what the industry wants is to drive quality, drive efficiency with risk-based monitoring all the way through the industry. At the moment, we don't have that penetration, but what we want to see is fit-for-purpose quality where a suitable risk-based monitoring solution drives a data set, a set of risk criteria, all the way through from start to finish and ends up with a robust data set which will withstand regulatory scrutiny. But the whole entire system also needs to allow us to demonstrate as we do that submission that the project has been run in a state of control. So all the way through from the beginning of that risk assessment, through the decisions you took, through to the output of the process, of being able to submit that as a package to the agency that they can believe this is a project which has been effectively delivered. Another benefit we do see that is not so often talked about is timeliness. So instead of the historical paradigm we may have seen of find and fix, of late identification of issues coming into database lock, and those causing delays to data locks and ultimately to submissions, risk-based monitoring, particularly through the centralized review of data, should identify issues earlier, should be identifying those issues at 10% of patients, not 90% of patients, and taking some of those remediation efforts off the critical path. And ultimately, it'd be remiss of me if I didn't talk about efficiency. So cost efficiency is an important component of risk-based monitoring. So we want to increase the number of shots on goal, ultimately increase the number of medicines to deliver to patients. And as a CRO industry, as a pharma development industry, that's clearly a goal we all share. So I suppose the key message from the presentation really is the management of complexity, understanding the forest for the trees, and really understanding what are the key components, enablers, and solutions that make up an entire risk-based monitoring process. And if we can do that, can cut through some of the misunderstanding and misinformation about risk-based monitoring, that's when we think we will see the penetration of this solution through the industry. So we're on stand 511 outside. I think we've got some time for questions now. But we have at the stand some white papers and also a recording of the FDA webinar we did a few months ago. And there's some good information on the building process within Covance on the portal using the link you can see before you. Thank you.
So Roger Joby, I'm a project management consultant. I think what you've described to me is project risk analysis and management. It's a tool that's been used in other industries like construction, IT, engineering for years. So why have we called it risk-based monitoring?
I think it's a good question. I think if you look at the misunderstandings around risk-based monitoring, a lot of them come from the title we've given it. And the fact is, if we'd called it something broader and not focused to that third box of monitoring that I showed on one of the slides, then perhaps the level of understanding that the industry would have would be a little bit more broad. So traditional monitoring approaches were not appropriately risk aware, and so this was a necessary implementation. But as you say, this is an extension of what people have done in the past, and the title is maybe somewhat misinformative.